Arthur, I must ask you this because, as you may have gathered, we were on the Beatle trip together. But Arthur tells me stories I didn't know about. And tell us, I mean, you and John Lennon, you hit it off. Why did you hit it off?
Well, as Ivor knows, when I joined the Beatles tour, see, I missed the first week of the Beatles tour because I was assigned at the Democratic Convention in Atlantic City, and there was no way the bureau chief was going to let me out of that. I had traveled with Martin Luther King all through the South. I was very familiar with Bull Connor. Remember that he first was the police chief of Birmingham when it was burning up with the riots, and then he became the head of the highway patrol. Well, he happened to be the head of the Alabama Democratic Convention delegation. And so I had to cover that because I had done all this for the years. And so when I joined the Beatles tour and happened to sit, Lennon and I sat together on the plane, on the charter, all the time. He in the aisle seat, me the next one, and he wanted, I don't know how they found out that I had done all this prior, but they did. I think, who was it, Derek Taylor, probably Ivor, their press agent, he knew about me, and I guess he had told the Beatles. But John Lennon was very intellectual. He wanted to know what was happening in America with all the riots, all the problems of civil rights. And John, all he wanted to do is, he had met Jack Kennedy, and he wanted to find out about Kennedy, he wanted to find out about Martin Luther King. And so I think that's why we hit it off so well. And then, of course, that, as Ivor knows, the first night he said, do you play Monopoly? I said, I play with my kids. He said, I got a board. He said, will you play? These other guys play poker. And folks, I lost my first $30 paycheck in the Army in a poker game. I've never played poker since. And I said, yeah, I'll play. Well, he and George and I know Ivor played probably a couple of games, but we played night after night after night, and the sun would be coming up and we'd still be playing. And I'd be falling asleep, and John used to go say, Don, it's your turn. And I'd say, let me go to sleep. You guys can sleep all day today. I got those 15 stories to write. But that's how we hit it off.
Wow. Great story. Anybody else?
Yeah. What was your biggest challenge as a blind person being a radio manager?
I think what I've learned since is, where am I off mic? My God. What I've learned since is what hurts blind people is our attitudes about blindness. And I'm talking about the public, employers. We assume that blind people can't do anything. They really can't. And I had that attitude myself. I didn't know anything about blindness. I thought, hell, I can't, what can I do? And then I got with the National Federation of the Blind. That guy in Boston, David Tiki, said to me, he said, do you know Fred Schroeder? I said, no. He said, well, he's the best white cane travel guy in the country, and he lives in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Look him up when you go home. And I did. And Fred Schroeder and I, to this day, are great friends. He's head of the World Blind Union, headed the rehab for the whole country under the Clinton administration. And Fred got me with the National Federation of the Blind. And I learned what the Federation is about, and that is that blind people, we got to learn independence. We've got to be able to do it. And I knew that I had to get that staff with me. And I met with them. We had talked about my blindness, talked about what we needed to do, and for the most part, everybody got on board except one person, and I write about it in my book. And you know, she thought, in those days, now I started getting that little pinhole, and I could make out your nose, then I could make out your eye and your chin, and I'd put all that together in my head to figure out who it was or how you looked. And guess what? When she'd come into my office, she would stick her thumbs in her ears and go like this, thinking that I couldn't see. It taught me a lot, and I didn't fire her for that. I think I got her to understand what blindness is, etc. That's how I worked at it. But I'm telling you, I had a great staff. It's just like Carol will tell you at KFWB. We had a great staff. And wherever I've been, it's been the people that have helped me. Whether I've been blind or sighted, it's the people. And it certainly was in Albuquerque.
Art, thank you very, very much. Wait. Somebody else?
Thank you, everybody.
Hold on, one moment.
Okay.
I don't have a question, I just have a comment. I was a college student in the 70s, and that's when I got my first job in broadcasting. And I want to say that, like every person in this room, my radio was tuned to KFWB every day, all day long, because we all depended upon you. And I just want to thank you for doing a great job in those years and doing a huge service to our city, because we all owe you a debt from that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very, very much. The book is, as you can see on the screen, Out of Sight, Blind and Doing All Right by Art Schreiber. I commend it to you. He's got copies. It's $10, no tax, cash only, please. If you don't have cash and you still want to read it, it is available on Amazon Books. Just look it up under Art Schreiber, okay? Next thing up, we're going to talk about Eyewitness News at 50 years old. And we're going to be doing a special program thanks to Steve Skutsky. And Steve, you can start to make your way up if you like. This is the 50th year coming up since Al Primo brought this amazingly successful format not only to KABC and WABC and WLS and so many other stations. It is all across the country a big success thanks to Al Primo and the people that followed in his footsteps to make this format work. And so Steve and I are going to do a program for you on February 2nd.
As Art says, it's about the people. And that's what Eyewitness News was all about. So when we talk about the 50th anniversary of Eyewitness News, it's not in it's them, and not just the people you saw on the air. For every on-air person, there was 10, 15, 20 more behind the scenes. And they all have reason at this point to be proud of what they did. At the time, maybe it wasn't always the most pleasant experience, but looking back on it, it's the good old days. And there was so much that took place. I was there for more than 45 of those 50 years. And, you know, I could talk at great length about all the changes I saw, but there are many other people that have their own stories, and we're going to be hearing from many of them, and it's going to be really fascinating. One of our confirmed guests is the legendary John Severino, and we'll be hearing from Harold Green, who actually had 3 tours of duty there. He started out as a producer of the 11 o'clock news before I was producer of the 11 o'clock news. Bob Tarlow was also an early producer of the 11 o'clock news back in its infancy of Eyewitness News. Please join us next time, whether you worked at Eyewitness News or not. We all want to turn out and have a great time. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
So that's Eyewitness News. Again, we're going to salute them. I think we're going to have a full crowd here. Gene Gleason, who was referenced there, will be here, and I think a lot of folks from Channel 7. We'll have to expand the room somehow. Again, that's February 2nd of 2019. We have to get to an area now that somebody told me when this organization was young that occasionally people are going to die, and obviously they are. And what we do as a family here is let you know, tell you about any funeral arrangements that I know of or am told about, and we honor their memory at the next lunch. And that's what we're going to do here for these 5 individuals. As you can see on the screen, they are Carol Cunningham, Jack D. Fox, Harvey Kogan, Ken Pianesa, and T. Batusto. And I would like to start off with Carol. This is Carol and Bob. Bob is here. Carol passed away only about a month ago. Carol and Bob lived in Hawaii. I knew of both of them. Bob and I met at Channel 2. Carol and I met at Channel 11 in the 70s when we were both working there. She went on to KNXT/KCBS. She was a fine writer, a wonderful producer, and most important of all, just a lovely individual. And I grieve her loss. I'd like you to hear from Bob, if he's up to it. I'd also like you to hear from Tim Baskerville. Tim is a regular here. Tim was Carol's first husband. And they met at Channel 11. Bob and Carol met at Channel 2. May I ask, is Robin here? Robin. Robin is Tim's daughter. We've never met before, but she has provided me with a lot of the photos that you're about to see. In fact, I'll take you through a few of those now, and then I'll have both of them talk. This is Carol at KTTV in the early 70s. That was the markup board in those days. That's how we did the rundown. You'd mark it with a marker on an acetate board like that. All of you know who that is on the left. I think that's George Putnam. This is KNXT. It's what it was in those days. This was, let's see, this would have been around 79 or 80, I'm guessing, Bob. And that's her in the KNXT newsroom. Great shot there. And again, Robin provided me with all of these, and I thank you very, very much. Again, this is Channel 2. Sandy Hill on the right. Down on the phone is Linda Douglas. Carol, of course, standing. This is Carol pregnant, by the way. That's Connie Chung on the right. In fact, Carol was pregnant with Robin.
Yeah, that's me in the picture.
That's you in the picture. Robin, where was this taken?
That was in here in Mountain, Michigan.
Ah. And this is Bob and Carol in Hawaii. And these are a couple other shots that Bob sent me. Carol on the beach. Honolulu, I presume, Waikiki?
On the beach.
Ah, okay. And now, Bob, I'm wondering if you mind coming up.
Carol and I were married in 62583, June 25th, 1983. And it just so happens that Tony Hankins in the room here was my best man for our wedding. There he is. We both happen to be pilots from Santa Monica Airport, and I happen to be the owner of the airplane, and it sat for a lot of time at Santa Monica Airport, and so I asked Tony if he would like to use it when I was not using it, so he filled in as my co-pilot or head pilot or whatever, and we used to have a great bit of fun. Great bit of fun with my airplane there. Back to Carol. I've got her in the car, but Bob Tarlow wanted $20 to bring her in here, and I didn't want to. She's in the trunk of the car, so you can't hear her.
I wanted to thank all of you for the messages that you sent me and Dad right before she passed. We were very fortunate to be with her, and I read her a lot of your messages, and I could watch her heart rate responding. You guys meant so much to her. This is really the best years of her life were spent with you, and I thank you for that.
This is Tim Baskerville.
Tim is her first husband.
Yes, it gets confusing. Carol worked in the TV news business under 3 last names. Her maiden name was Kaler when she worked at Metro Media. Then I met her in '72. We were married in '74. Then she worked under the name Baskerville, and of course later when she married Bob Cunningham. So various people knew her under various professional names. Anyway, obviously very special to me, and my heart goes out to Bob and for the loss, which was significant. Carol was a real pioneer in the business. When KNXT felt some of the competitive pressure in the '70s, they asked Carol to work with Connie Chung to introduce the first 4:30 newscast in the market. There was already a 5 to 7 block, but they decided, okay, we need to get ahead, and so they had Carol work with Connie to create that concept for that show. So she had quite a successful career. I think the last job in the business was at FNN, I believe, Financial News Network, before CNBC bought it. And then she went on to some other activities outside the business and eventually retired to Hawaii with Bob. As long as I've got the microphone, this is an eerie moment for me because of the 5 people on the screen that we're remembering today. I worked with 4 of them. One of them was a good friend of mine for several decades, T. Basusto, and of course I married one. So it sort of makes you think of your own mortality when in just 3 months you could lose that many people who you were close to. I didn't, as long as I've got the mic, I did want to say something about T. Basusto, who I considered a dear friend. T didn't really consider himself part of the news business, although he was in it. He was really a filmmaker, a member in good standing of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. And I know a lot of people have good memories of going to him to Oscar screenings and other events. And I tried to be helpful to him in some of his independent producing activities over many years. And when I think of this group, and I think of the news business as I remember it back from the so-called golden era, we all had a lot of fun, but some of us were, I would say, cynical wouldn't be an unfair word. And I think the one thing you can say about T is he was not cynical. He was something of a dreamer, and I feel a real loss when the world lost a genuine dreamer and a really good person. So my heart goes out to him. I know he had a very close relationship with his daughter, Sylvie, who was really the light of his life. And, very fond memories of T as well. So, thank you.
And unfortunately, we move on. And we move to the person among the 5 people who we are honoring was here by far the most often. And that's Jack D. Fox, of course, the husband of Carolyn Fox, who we all know and love. Their son John is here today. If you both don't mind, thank you. That's Carolyn and Fox. And we have a very special person who's going to deliver the eulogy for Jack. And as she does so, I'm going to go through photos, and I have a lot of them, of all of his appearances here at lunches over the last 5 or 6 years. I'd like to introduce Linda Deutsch. And Linda, why don't you sit down? You want to stand? Linda, by the way, as you probably know, had a recent knee replacement.
And I guess that qualifies me as a real geezer.
Never, never.
I'm just going to go through these slides as you
Okay,
talk.
sure.
Okay?
Yeah, I've written a few words. It's been about a month since my friend Jack Fox left us, finally yielding to an assortment of physical ailments that might come under the simple heading of old age. Yet it is impossible to think of my vibrant, jovial friend as old. So many of you who shared Geezer's lunches with him, and I think he was here for most of them, would join me in attesting to his youthful spirit until the very end. Jack loved the Geezers, a group that might have been invented for him. He chided me for objecting to the title. He liked it. He loved trading memories with his former colleagues and sharing a meal with those who remembered the golden age of journalism. Even if he could not see toward the end, in recent years, Jack's beloved wife, Carolyn, would come with him and steer him toward those he knew, and the years would disappear as they told each other funny stories. I've been thinking a lot about my friend Jack since he passed. We were friends for over 40 years, and in researching his accomplishments, I came to the conclusion that Jack lived several lives. No wonder he was a little tired at the end. Some of you knew him in one or two of those incarnations, but I think a few of you did not know the wide arena he occupied in his lifetime. So I decided I would tell you a story which I call The Many Lives of Jack Fox. In his first life, Jack was a New York boy, born in Brooklyn at the dawn of the Great Depression. His parents supported he and his older sister operating a dry goods store. As a high school student during World War II, Jack knew that he would be drafted eventually into the Army. A relative suggested he gain a skill that would keep him out of combat. So while still in high school, he enrolled in classes to learn radiology. Thus, when he was drafted at age 17, he was already qualified as an X-ray technician, and he was assigned to be a medic in Korea during the years leading up to the Korean War. It was his own private MASH experience, saving lives in the field. He always maintained a fondness for the Korean people and their food. In his later years, when he made trips to Korea, Carolyn would say she knew he was home before he arrived because she could smell the garlic a block away. Back in New York, Jack decided to try his hand at the news business. He joined the New York Post as a copy boy, running stories for the more seasoned reporters, including his lifelong friend Marcy Rothman, who recently preceded him to the great newsroom in the sky. Determined to get a college degree, he attended school at night and took 7 years to attain his Bachelor of Arts degree from New York University. It was during this time that Jack was introduced to a young lady who was living in a residential hotel in New York City, seeking her own career. It appears to have been love at first sight, at least for him. Carolyn wasn't so sure. She remembers him as being a very skinny guy who sought to impress her on one of their first dates in a rather strange way. They were caught in the rain, and Jack, in his best Sir Walter Raleigh imitation, scooped his date up in his arms and tried carrying her across a puddle. As he swayed back and forth, Carolyn looked at him in horror and exclaimed, "Put me down, you idiot!" And that, ladies and gentlemen, is called the start of a great romance. Their courtship progressed, and in 1956, Carolyn and Jack were married, and he began his most important life as devoted husband and father. At the Post, he was promoted to reporter and began covering important stories. He was most proud of his investigative work he did in the 50s that led to the downfall of the odious Senator Joe McCarthy. His work drew the attention of CBS News, which offered him a job, and his next life was as a TV reporter in New York City. There is a famous photo of Jack on top of a TV truck as his crew photographed a speech by Malcolm X. Jack always managed to get Malcolm's attention by wearing a bow tie when he covered him, in the style of the Fruit of Islam followers who surrounded him. He is wearing a bow tie in that photo. Jack's life as a New York reporter eventually yielded to an offer to go west. The CBS News director in Los Angeles needed the help of an experienced pro in launching a show called The Big News. He recruited Jack as his assignment editor. By then, the Foxes had expanded their den to include son John and daughter Susan. They were flown to Los Angeles and put up at the Beverly Hilton Hotel, which was an exciting adventure for the kids, who quickly learned how to call room service. It was a Hollywood version of Eloise at the Plaza. Jack's California life had now begun. They moved to the Los Feliz area and eventually settled in Sherman Oaks on a Jacaranda-lined street where the Foxes remained for the rest of their 62-year marriage. In subsequent years, Jack would become the managing editor of The Hollywood Reporter, directing coverage of the movie business, and in the late 1970s, he was lured into another life as director of public relations and marketing for the Mattel Toy Company. That was how he became what he described as Barbie's personal publicist. As usual, he was good at what he did, and Barbie became a household word. While at Mattel, he became aware of the massive epidemic of toy knockoffs that involved foreign mobs producing fake versions of Barbie and other toys, which they marketed in Asia. That was when Jack launched his last professional career as an investigator tracking down the criminals and helping to bring them to justice. His company, Commercial Counterfeiting Control, became known in the business as Fake Busters, and they were able to effect a number of arrests and federal trials. He made many trips abroad chasing his prey under assumed names. I was fortunate enough to be traveling in Asia with friends at that time, and we were able to meet up in Hong Kong and Taiwan, among other exotic ports. With Carolyn at his side, we shared many spectacular Asian meals, but were never allowed to discuss our friend's occupation in public. One of our friends kept referring to him as a spy. Again, he was so good at what he did that the bad guys wanted to stop him. And his work became quite dangerous, and eventually, at the urging of his family, he retired from that business. But even in retirement, Jack had dreams to fulfill. He and Carolyn became active on the board of the Radio Television News Association. Although no one was calling the press enemy of the people then, reporters were not being seen as the heroes Jack thought they were. With his ties to the toy business, Jack came up with an idea that would benefit a lot of people, including the press. He had visited Children's Hospital and saw the sadness of chronically ill kids. At Christmas, everyone would donate toys to them, but not the rest of the year. Thus was born the project known as Christmas in July. Some of you may remember it. Jack enlisted news stations to collect lots of toys and recruited news personalities to play Santa and put on a show. The hospital recreation room was festooned with Christmas decorations in July, and the children's smiles were a gift to all who participated. Jack said it was the most rewarding thing he ever did. In retirement, Jack had a motto: life is good, and he did everything to make it so. He and Carolyn were my companions on several memorable trips to Las Vegas, where he visited some of the undercover crew he worked with on his Fake Buster business. He hated gambling, but Carolyn loved it. Guess who made their vacation reservations? New Year's Eve was party time at the Foxes, and Jack would break open some of the most prized bottles in his extensive wine collection. The Foxes threw great parties for their anniversaries, and his kids once hosted a birthday party in which everyone was given a mask of Jack's face to hold up in front of them. When he walked in the room, he saw himself reflected 100 times over. He said it was the weirdest sensation he ever had. Jack began to write an autobiography, but the loss of his eyesight to macular degeneration interfered. He never did give up on that, working with people from the Braille Institute and his son John to adapt to new large type and voice-activated computers. I wish he could have been here to hear Art's talk. I never heard him complain about not being able to see us clearly. After all, he knew what we looked like from decades of shared good times. I'm sorry he didn't finish that book, which would have been a joyful history of the golden age of journalism, when multiple newspapers filled the racks and television produced stars like Walter Cronkite and Edward R. Murrow. Jack was horrified at the current talk of fake news. He was the real thing, and he earned the respect and love of those who knew and worked with him in every one of his lives. Please join me in a toast to one of the authentic good guys, Jack Fox.
There is a photo in here that I purposely kind of held to last. That's Jack in a frog suit. I'm sure there's a great story behind that. So Linda sent that to me, and I thought I would just come up with the title, Carolyn with her Prince. And we continue. This is Harvey Kogan. Harvey was here for a number of lunches. Harvey's actually had a remarkable career. I sent out his obituary at the time that he died. He was a retired U.S. Air Force Lieutenant Colonel. He was an Eagle Scout, which my son would appreciate, who isn't here. He had an MS in meteorology from UCLA. He was a news and weather producer at KNXT, back in the KNXT days. And later, he was an IT and computer consultant, actually right up until the point where he died. And there was a paid obit, which I sent you folks. There was a line in there which I thought was germane to Harvey. It says, Harvey will be deeply missed and fondly remembered for his knowledge of the best deals, coupons, and his weather prediction accuracy. Harvey Kogan. This is Ken Bianessa. Ken worked also for The Deuce, KNXT. He was a graphic artist and assistant editor at Channel 2. I want to thank Dee for... Dee, where are you? Do you want to say anything? Okay. Dee was the one who told me about both the death of Ken and the death of T.
Yeah, Bob. So Kenny worked with me in KNXT in the early 70s. And after that, I think he was there about 8 years, and then he became a film editor, got married, had 2 kids, and kind of held his own as far as really loving the business. He often told me KNXT was a great petri dish. It was a good place to find out what you wanted to do, whether it was writing or camera or editing. And I found that to be true as well. As you can see, he was a avid Dodger fan. Sorry to say they lost their bid the last couple of years, but he would have loved to have been at the game. He also spent a lot of his last days driving his Porsche. He had a 68 911 that he really got into after a while. And he passed away in Hawaii last November, about a year from November 6th, about a year ago. And but he lived his life like a dreamer would, like you mentioned about T. Basesto. I think Kenny was also a dreamer. And to finish up with T, who was also a really good friend of mine, that's his daughter Sylvie. She was at his side when he died. In fact, she was with him, laying down with him. And he really loved her. I miss him too. And one other note about him was that he's the only person I ever knew who won an Academy Award. His dad actually, and he won the award for an animated film called It's Always Right to Be Right, or It's Not Always Right to Be Right, I think it was. And to this day, as far as I know, his last project was working on a UPA documentary, which was a history of Mr. Magoo and Gerald McBoing, who his father actually created in the early 50s. So anyway, that's it. My two good friends, T and Ken. Thank you.
And Tim, thank you for your kind words about T as well. Those of us who were back in the Deuce in those days remember him and remember Ken with fondness. The next thing I want to tell you about is a page that exists on the website. Some of you have probably seen it. It's an in memoriam page. I've not had a chance to include T and Ken yet, but I will. These are some of the folks that lost their lives this year. Michael Conley on the far right, who I've talked about extensively here before, was a dear friend and was one of the founders of this group and passed away, and we've memorialized him. But if you go to newsgeezers.com, there's a group of tabs on the upper level, and if you click on In Memoriam and you scroll down, there are far too many names on there. But they're people that we love and people that we miss. We're going to move on because we need to move on to the journalists of tomorrow. And you'll find our student panel on part 3 of this 3-part video highlight presentation of the News Geezers meeting of Saturday, November 10th, 2018. Thanks for continuing to watch.